The atmosphere at Summit MMA became eerily silent as Marcus the Viper Donovan hurled his fighting gloves at Jason Statham's feet, his voice cutting through the gym like a knife. "Fight me, Hollywood, or walk away like the fraud you are." The challenge hung in the air, heavy with tension. Just moments earlier, the scene had been drastically different. Jason had entered the renowned Las Vegas fighting gym unassumingly, dressed in a simple black hoodie, his presence commanding yet unobtrusive. While professional fighters trained intensely around him, Jason noticed a young fighter named Leo struggling desperately with his footwork. The teenager's movements were hesitant and uncoordinated, while his coach Carlos remained distracted by his phone, barely offering guidance. With quiet authority, Jason approached Leo. "Keep your weight centered, breathe through the movement," he advised, demonstrating the proper technique. The gratitude in Leo's eyes was immediate as his form improved drastically. But across the gym, Marcus noticed this interaction, his ego instantly inflamed. The regional champion abandoned his training session, storming across the mat with predatory intensity, his heavily tattooed body tensed with aggression as he confronted the movie star. "Teaching kids now, action hero," Marcus sneered, invading Jason's personal space. "Your Hollywood black belt means nothing in a real cage. Subscribe now and hit that like button. Drop a comment telling us what country you're watching from. The Statham showdown continues, and you won't want to miss what happens next." Jason stood motionless as the gym fell completely silent, the echo of Marcus's words still hanging in the air. The black and red fighting gloves lay between them like a declaration of war, their presence transforming the ordinary training session into something far more consequential. Every fighter, trainer, and spectator froze in place, the usual cacophony of grunts, pad strikes, and music fading to nothing as all eyes focused on this unexpected confrontation. "What's it gonna be, Statham?" Marcus sneered, his voice cutting through the tension. "You came into my territory, messed with my fighter. Time to back up those movie stunts with some real blood." The regional champion's confidence was palpable, radiating from his heavily muscled frame, adorned with championship tattoos across his shoulders and chest. Jason remained calm, his breathing measured and controlled. He looked down at the gloves, then across the gym where Leo stood wide-eyed, clearly embarrassed to be the catalyst for this confrontation. Several fighters had already pulled out phones, eager to capture what they believed would be the humiliation of a Hollywood star. A hushed whisper rippled through the crowd, "The Viper's gonna put this actor in the hospital." The Summit MMA facility in downtown Chicago was known for producing legitimate contenders. Its walls were adorned with championship belts and signed photos of UFC legends who had trained there. The polished octagon cage in the center stood illuminated under bright lights, as if waiting for this very moment. Marcus Donovan wasn't just any fighter, he was the gym's crown jewel, undefeated in 14 professional bouts, with 12 coming by way of dramatic finishes. "You know," Jason finally spoke, his voice surprisingly soft yet carrying to every corner of the now silent gym, "where I come from, respect is earned through discipline, not intimidation." His British accent carried a steely edge beneath its measured tone. Marcus laughed, the sound echoing off the gym's concrete walls. "Discipline, this ain't a movie set with stunt coordinators and safety pads." He gestured to the cage. "In there, it's just you, me, and consequences." Several of Marcus's training partners nodded in agreement, crossing their arms with smug satisfaction. Carlos, the head coach, pushed through the gathering crowd, his weathered face creased with concern. "Donovan, this isn't necessary. Mr. Statham was just passing through." "No," Marcus cut him off sharply. "Hollywood here thinks he can walk in and take over. I've seen his movies, all camera tricks and editing." He turned back to Jason, eyes narrowing. "Let's see how those fancy moves work against someone who hits back for real." Jason's expression remained unchanged as he surveyed the room. The young fighters along the wall watched with a mixture of excitement and discomfort. Leo looked particularly distressed, his training session having inadvertently sparked this confrontation. Behind Marcus stood his entourage, 3 training partners with matching team shirts, all filming with their phones, anticipating viral content. With deliberate slowness, Jason removed his hoodie, revealing a simple black compression shirt underneath. The gym lights highlighted the definition in his arms and shoulders, not the exaggerated bulk of a bodybuilder, but the functional muscle of someone who trained for purpose rather than appearance. A thin scar ran along his forearm, a reminder of stunts gone wrong and real pain endured. "I didn't come here looking for this," Jason said quietly, stepping forward and picking up the gloves. The leather felt familiar in his hands, a sensation that transported him back to his competitive days long before Hollywood discovered him. But if this is what you need to learn about respect, I accept your invitation. The crowd erupted in exclamations and hurried movements. Someone called for mouthguards and headgear. Carlos protested weakly but was drowned out by the excitement. Marcus's smile widened with predatory satisfaction as he backed toward the cage, gesturing for Jason to follow. 10 minutes, Carlos announced reluctantly, asserting some control over the situation. Standard MMA rules, first blood or submission ends it. He looked at Jason with concern. Are you sure about this, Mr. Statham? Jason nodded once, pulling on the gloves with practiced ease. Sometimes lessons need to be physical to be remembered. His eyes never left Marcus, who was already bouncing on his toes at the cage entrance, performing for the growing audience of phone cameras. As Jason approached the cage, Leo stepped forward hesitantly. Sir, I'm sorry about this. You don't have to. It's not your fault, Jason replied, patting the young fighter's shoulder. Some people confuse aggression with strength. That's a dangerous mistake. With those words, he ducked through the cage door as someone swung it open. Inside the octagon, the atmosphere intensified. The overhead lights seemed brighter, the mat cleaner, the fence more confining. Marcus paced like a caged animal on the opposite side, shadowboxing and throwing exaggerated kicks for his audience. His training partners hooted encouragement, already celebrating a victory not yet achieved. Carlos stepped between them, looking uncomfortable with his role as impromptu referee. Keep it clean, no eye gouging, no groin shots. When I say break, you break. He glanced nervously between the two fighters. Ready. Marcus nodded eagerly, bouncing on the balls of his feet. Been ready my whole life to expose frauds like him. Jason simply nodded, his stance relaxed but alert, hands positioned perfectly to protect his centerline. Carlos backed away, raised his hand, and brought it down with a sharp begin. The challenge had been made, the stage was set, and as Marcus, the Viper Donovan, lunged forward with his first strike, the real lesson was about to begin. Carlos's hand sliced through the air and the makeshift match erupted into chaos. Marcus, the Viper Donovan, lunged forward with predatory speed, unleashing a vicious combination that would have flattened most opponents. Jason sidestepped the initial rush with practiced precision, but Marcus's follow-up low kick landed with a sickening crack against his outer thigh. The impact echoed through the gym, drawing a collective gasp from the growing audience. First blood to the Viper, someone shouted from beyond the cage, as Marcus's training partners banged enthusiastically on the fence. The Chicago Gym's champion pressed his advantage immediately, switching stances and driving Jason backward with a relentless barrage of strikes. A teep kick to the midsection forced the air from Jason's lungs, and a glancing left hook caught his temple, momentarily disrupting his balance. Hollywood's about to get a reality check, Marcus taunted, circling like the predator his nickname suggested. The confidence in his movements was unmistakable, the fluid grace of someone who had spent thousands of hours perfecting his craft. His tattooed torso glistened with sweat under the harsh gym lights as he stalked forward again, launching a spinning back kick that Jason barely managed to block. The impact drove Jason against the cage wall, where Marcus immediately closed the distance, pinning him with brutal efficiency. Feel that, Marcus hissed, driving short, punishing elbows into Jason's shoulders and ribs. This ain't CGI pain, movie star. Jason absorbed the blows silently, his expression revealing nothing as Marcus continued his assault. From outside the cage, Leo watched with growing concern. The teenager who had inadvertently triggered this confrontation now stood wide-eyed among the spectators, his coach Carlos looking equally troubled beside him. He's gonna get hurt, Leo whispered, but Carlos merely shook his head, his experienced eyes catching something the others missed. Marcus backed away momentarily, savoring his apparent dominance, then launched another blistering combination. A right hook clipped Jason's jaw, drawing a thin line of crimson that trickled down his neck. The sight of blood seemed to energize Marcus further, and he pointed dramatically at the injury. Cut him already, just like I said. The gym erupted in scattered cheers and jeers, phone cameras zooming in to capture the moment. Jason touched the blood with his gloved hand, examining it with detached curiosity. His breathing remained measured despite the onslaught he'd endured. Marcus, interpreting this calm as weakness, surged forward again with a flying knee aimed at Jason's head. Finish him, Viper, shouted one of Marcus's entourage, the words hanging in the air as Marcus closed in for what he believed would be the decisive blow. but something imperceptible had shifted in Jason's stance, a subtle realignment of weight, a minute adjustment in his guard position. Like a chess master who had spent the opening move studying his opponent's patterns, Jason had gathered all the information he needed. As Marcus's knee sliced through the air toward its target, the gym collectively held its breath. The regional champion's face reflected absolute certainty. This was the moment he would cement his reputation by demolishing a Hollywood pretender. What he failed to notice was the calculated gleam that had appeared in Jason Statham's eyes, the look of a predator who had allowed his prey just enough rope to hang itself. The tide was about to turn, and no one in the Summit MMA gym, least of all Marcus, the Viper Donovan, was prepared for what would happen next. The moment hung in the air like suspended lightning as Marcus's flying knee sliced toward Jason's head. What happened next stunned every witness in the Chicago gym. With a fluidity that seemed almost supernatural, Jason pivoted a mere 3 inches to the side, just enough for the knee to whistle past his ear. In that fractional second of Marcus's overextension, Jason struck. His counter was not spectacular or theatrical, no spinning kicks or acrobatics, just a perfectly timed straight right hand that connected with Marcus's floating rib as he descended from his missed attack. The impact produced a sickening thud that reverberated through the cage. Marcus's expression transformed instantly from confidence to confusion as oxygen abandoned his lungs. "First mistake," Jason muttered, his voice barely audible above the collective gasp of the audience. Without pause, he followed with a devastating left hook to Marcus's liver, causing the regional champion to instinctively curl inward, his previous bravado evaporating like morning dew under a harsh sun. Marcus stumbled backward, his face contorted in disbelief. "Lucky shot," he wheezed, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his growing uncertainty. He attempted to reset, bouncing on his toes with diminished energy, his earlier fluid movements now mechanical and hesitant. Jason advanced methodically, his footwork suddenly transformed. Gone was the defensive fighter who had weathered the initial storm. In his place stood a predator, each step calculated, each movement economical. The gym fell deathly quiet as the nature of the contest shifted dramatically before their eyes. From outside the cage, Leo watched in astonishment as Jason systematically dismantled the gym's champion. He was waiting, the teenager whispered to Carlos. He was studying him the whole time. Carlos nodded grimly. That's the difference between fighting and fighting smart. Marcus launched a desperate combination, but Jason slipped each punch with minimal movement, conserving energy while his opponent depleted his reserves. When Marcus attempted another spinning technique, Jason timed it perfectly, stepping inside the arc and delivering a short elbow that split the skin above Marcus's left eye. Blood immediately began trickling down, partially obscuring his vision. The predator had become the prey, and as Jason continued his calculated advance, everyone watching knew that Marcus, the Viper, Donovan was about to receive the most painful lesson of his fighting career. The blood from Marcus's cut eye had transformed his cocky demeanor into something primal and desperate. He lunged forward with reckless abandon, throwing a wild haymaker that whistled harmlessly past Jason's ear. In that critical moment of overextension, Jason executed his endgame with surgical precision. A lightning-fast jab stunned Marcus momentarily, creating the perfect opening for Jason's follow-up. With mechanical efficiency, Jason pivoted on his back foot and unleashed a devastating right cross that connected squarely with Marcus's jaw. The impact reverberated through the Chicago gym like a thunderclap, causing even the most hardened fighters to wince. Marcus's eyes glazed over instantly as his body went rigid before crumpling to the canvas in slow motion. The gym's champion lay sprawled on his back, consciousness temporarily suspended by the perfect placement of Jason's strike. The silence that followed was deafening, no cheers, no taunts, just collective shock as everyone processed what they'd witnessed. Carlos rushed into the cage, kneeling beside the fallen fighter. "He's breathing," he announced, relief evident in his voice. Marcus stirred slightly, a low groan escaping his lips as awareness slowly returned to his battered form. Jason stood motionless, his expression revealing neither triumph nor satisfaction. The Hollywood star who had been dismissed as a pretender had just delivered a masterclass in fighting efficiency, and as Marcus's training partners scrambled into the cage to assist their fallen champion, the message had been received loud and clear. The Chicago gym remained frozen in a tableau of collective shock as Marcus's teammates helped him into a seated position. Blood trickled from his split brow and swollen lip as awareness gradually returned to his eyes. The regional champion looked up at Jason with a mixture of confusion and dawning respect. The cockiness that had defined him moments earlier completely evaporated. What just happened?" Marcus mumbled, his voice barely audible over the hushed whispers that now rippled through the audience. Jason knelt beside him, not in triumph but in a gesture of professional respect. "You fought well," he said quietly, offering a gloved hand, "but fighting and winning aren't always about who hits hardest." The gym watched in stunned silence as Jason helped Marcus to his feet. No celebration, no taunting, no victory dance, just the quiet dignity of a man who had proven his point without needing to announce it. The phones recording the scene captured something more valuable than a knockout. They captured character. Leo pushed through the small crowd, his young face alight with admiration. "That was incredible," he breathed, looking at Jason with newfound reverence. "You knew exactly what he was going to do before he did it." Jason removed his gloves methodically, handing them to Carlos. "It's not magic," he explained, his voice carrying across the now silent gym. "It's patience. Reading your opponent is more important than overpowering them." He glanced at Marcus, who was being attended to by a gym medic. "Strength without control is just wasted energy." The onlookers exchanged glances, many nodding in silent agreement. Several fighters who had been smirking earlier now looked thoughtful, even chastened. Marcus's most vocal supporter, a heavyweight with tribal tattoos covering his arms, slipped his phone into his pocket without posting the footage he'd captured. Outside the cage, Carlos approached Jason with newfound respect in his eyes. "In 20 years of coaching, I've never seen someone dismantle a fighter that efficiently," he admitted. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Jason's expression remained neutral as he dabbed at the small cut on his lip. "I learned from losing," he replied simply. "The best teachers are your own mistakes." The comment rippled through the gym, landing particularly heavily on the younger fighters. Leo scribbled something in a small notebook he pulled from his gym bag, clearly determined to remember the moment. As Jason gathered his belongings and prepared to leave, Marcus approached him, limping slightly but moving under his own power. The gym fell silent again, tension building as everyone anticipated another confrontation. Instead, Marcus extended his hand. "I misjudged you," he said, his voice thick with emotion and lingering pain. "I thought being a champion meant being the loudest in the room." Jason clasped his hand firmly. "The strongest currents run beneath still waters," he replied. "Your technique is solid, your mindset needs work." Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing the criticism without defensiveness for perhaps the first time in his fighting career. Something fundamental had shifted in the regional champion's understanding of what it meant to be a warrior. The Chicago gym's atmosphere had transformed completely. Where there had been jeers and taunts, there was now thoughtful silence. Where there had been dismissive laughter, there was now attentive respect. Jason had delivered more than a physical lesson. He had demonstrated the profound difference between fighting for ego and fighting with purpose. As Jason zipped up his hoodie and headed toward the exit, fighters stepped aside respectfully. No one asked for autographs or selfies. They simply acknowledged him with nods of newfound respect. He had entered their world not as a celebrity but as a practitioner, and he had earned their recognition through skill rather than fame. At the door, Jason paused and turned to face the gym one last time. "Remember," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the facility, "true strength is quiet. It doesn't need to announce itself." His eyes swept across the faces watching him, fighters, coaches, spectators alike. The most dangerous opponent isn't the one who talks the most, it's the one who observes the longest. With those words hanging in the air like a final lesson, Jason Statham stepped out into the Chicago evening, leaving behind not just the memory of a spectacular fight, but a profound understanding that would change how every person in that gym approached their craft from that day forward.